You're listening to the StatsBomb Football Podcast.
One half a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us.
Welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast. I am your host, Seth Partnow, Director of North American Sports. I am joined today, as always, by Matthew Edwards. Matt, how you doing today?
Great. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. And as almost always, by CEO Ted Knutson. Ted, how are you feeling this fine afternoon?
I'm frustrated with you, sir. I feel like you've dropped the coach from Matt Edwards' title there. Put some respect on his name.
Sorry. The coach, Matt Edwards.
There we go.
Who's going to start up by coaching us up on some terrible food items again, as we like to do, starting with Matt's Baja Blast.
All right.
Now, before you go, was this a made-up
How do you
thing?
say it and then cut him off? How do you do that? What sort of podcast host are you?
I have the mic and you will listen. I think one of our coworkers sent an image of some Baja Blast branded cigarettes. That can't be a real thing.
From what the research I did, they do not seem like they're real.
Okay.
Just toss the Baja Blast on anything and it's good marketing, right?
Okay.
In the background.
So I was a little nervous and excited to watch Matt light up a smoke, as he has done in all the other moments that we've got. I thought that was the next part of the podcast. I was like, we have to actually put the video up with that one.
That would be video worthy for sure. All right, to the serious talk of the Baja Blast of the week.
Serious version.
Yeah, serious. So recently they've come up with Nerds Gummy Clusters, which is what I've found to be the quickest way to get sugar just straight into your body. It's just so sugary. Looks like Seth's going to get some. I was at the store and I found these big, chewy nerds. So they're big and chewy and they're crunchy on the outside.
I feel like you guys are about 2 years behind my children. We went to an extended U.S. holiday back in the summer of 22 and basically went through all of the U.S. candy over the course of a month. And the big nerds and the gummy nerds were there. What we found, so I am a Lifesavers gummies addict, particularly the Collisions. Collisions are just, I have to bring back many bags every single trip. But we also found that the Jolly Rancher gummies were really good. So, yeah.
I would say these are similar to the Nerds Gummy Clusters, but you don't have to actually chew each individual nerd, which is my biggest complaint. So you get the chewy, you get the good Nerds flavoring, sugar, really good. Definitely worthwhile.
Seth's got a side business he's going to launch up in Alaska that infuses THC into these, and that's going to take off for all the moose up there.
You think someone hasn't already done that?
I'm sure he has.
I have reliable sources that inform me that they've figured out ways to infuse THC into just about anything.
It's true
up in Alaska, where cannabis has been in a weird gray limbo, semi-legal situation for about 40 years. So people have done some things.
Where would we go from here, boys?
My favorite candy is bottle caps, but we can move on from there, which is they're like, have you ever had them, Ted? They're like sweet tarts, but like cola flavored.
Oh yeah, no, I have had those. My children forced flying saucers on to me for the first time recently, which were basically disgusting.
So we had since we're talking candy, why not? We had multiple bars at our wedding, including a candy bar, and one of the more controversial items were the flying saucers, which are basically two hemispheres of cardboard, which are either have like a powder or disgusting little pellets inside them, and you never know which until you bite into one.
Think of it as a pixie stick with an edible wrapper, and you're probably as close as you're going to get.
A technically edible wrapper, I would say.
Yeah.
Think of the worst fortune cookie you ever had, and that's what they. Anyway, on to more serious business. we are through the bulk of sort of the off-season personnel moves. There's players being released and signed here or there in the NFL. There's probably still a few players that are gonna land here or there in the college ranks. But with that in mind, and nothing really happening aside from rumors and innuendo for the next couple of months, this is going to be our last episode for a little bit. But we wanted to leave people with some thoughts on kind of how to do a data in the football space. I mean, I think all of us have benefited greatly from the availability of public work in these areas, and certainly as a company, like we've paid great attention to what people are doing out there and seeing, hey, with a little bit better data, how can we approach this problem? So I think that's a great place to start, is I guess to ask Matt, as the most hands-on of bootstrapped football analytics professional, like what were the things that you got started on, and how would you advise someone looking to familiarize themselves to go about it?
Yeah, I think that's actually a question that I get regularly from either just people who find my page on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. It's just kind of like, how do I get started in football analytics? And there are a lot of great free resources. We're going to talk about some really good free data samples and things from StatsBomb specifically, but there are others out there as well. And I think that for me, when I was first getting into it, I was pretty unaware of what data was out there. I'd gotten to the University of Virginia and we had a couple of data sources, but pretty quickly I realized that we were behind and I needed to get access to better data. We now live in a time where there are resources available for people in both R and Python to get really robust data sets, both in college football and in the NFL. So there's like NFL Fast R or NFL Fast Py and similar for college football. And for the most part, I think those are probably the best free data sources that are available. And there are a ton of free tutorials and resources on how to download the data, how to work with it, that can give people a really great place to start.
Matt, I'm going to take offense.
Okay.
Those are the best free data sources available to people. This is where you started, but
for new people, for newcomers.
I see.
That's a good couch, because of you're referring to our free data that we have put out, and tracking data is a couple of steps down the road for people that are wanting to learn how to work with data.
So what we did in the soccer space was we went back and we collected. I was trying to think of cool data sets to build so that people could play with it, so that we could release it out into the public. Because one of the things that we've always done, and one of the things that I struggled with when I first got started, was finding robust, interesting data sets to be able to play with and analyze. And in fact, the reason why I ended up with jobs in professional soccer was because we finally had public data to be able to start analyzing and taking looks at it. Otherwise, I've been working on data in the gambling space since 2005. So totally different data sets at that time. Now those two data sets are pretty conflated, aggregated together in a lot of ways. So we went back and we collected and actually paid random Barcelona otakus on the internet who had all the old video files from every Barcelona game that they could find. They'd been collecting this and they had a data set of it. And so we paid them on a per game basis for the ones that we could not find, which went all the way back to 2004 on Messi's Barcelona debut. That was a year-long struggle to get to just the video files to be able to collect that stuff. But we wanted to be able to have the longitudinal data set, the first time anybody had put together something like that, of the greatest soccer player of all time. So we did that over there. And then when we were looking at what would be cool, and sometimes at StatsBomb, we got to ask that question, what would be cool? What would be cool to put together in the American football space? There was one very obvious answer. And when we were thinking about it, he had been close to retiring for 2 years. And then finally, when we released it, he had retired. So the TB12 DB, or Tom Brady 12 data biography is kind of what we did. I think we've got 6 seasons of his career out there now, and we started with some event data, and then we then did the combined event and tracking data as you got it. We have not done more because it's a lot of work at the moment, but there's potential for that to happen in the future with access to video. And to my knowledge, it's the only sort of like seasonal, robust data set that has all of that information for people to be able to play with. That was the kind of thought and purpose behind it. It doesn't replace NFL FastR or any of the other free stuff. It's sort of a complementary thing, but it is much closer to the data that you will want to be able to understand in order to get jobs in American football. It's basically the same data set or a comparable data set to what you're going to get out of Next Gen Stats. It actually has some additional data points in it than even what the NFL released to people that are playing.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that is overlooked, is that when we talk about people that are getting jobs in football analytics regularly, it is people that have done public work. A lot of times it's from the Big Data Bowl competition that is amazing. And if people are looking to get into data, even if it's not for football specifically, people enter that, and it's a good way to get public work out, get something to put in a portfolio. And people have gotten jobs in multiple sports, not just in football. But the Big Data Bowl data that is released each year, they're releasing a little bit more year by year, but the first year it was just one individual screenshot from their tracking data, like the screenshot at the time of handoff, I believe. Then it was a little bit more. Then it was a couple of games. Then it was, maybe half of a season. And the thing that I think is great about our data is you get multiple seasons, so that if you are wanting to build a model, you're able to say, okay, I've got multiple seasons of data that I could work with to see how things change year over year, and to get a better feel for what it is that you're going to be working with if you want a job at the NFL. But I think the way that the Big Data Bowl did it is smart if you are wanting to get into the data. Is we have this full 5-6 seasons worth of data, of tracking data, of 30 times a second, every player, every game, and it can be pretty overwhelming. And so a nice way that they did it was you can start by just looking at one frame or 2 frames at a play. Like, what can I learn from the snap frame? Isolate that. What is there? Analyze that. Do a bunch of work with it. Then add a couple of other frames and kind of build from just a really easy beginning as you're starting to understand what tracking data is, because it can be overwhelming for sure.
Do we help people to be able to do that with our data?
We do. That was like a great segue. You're like a professional here. So at our GitHub page on the AMF StatsBomb GitHub, you can find, that's where we house all of the data. Then there are Python and R tutorials for analyzing the events, analyzing the play data set, and then as well as analyzing the tracking data. So it'll teach you how to pull an individual play out of the data, how to organize it, how to plot it, how to just work with it in general, to give you some good examples.
One thing that I want to say that I think is really important that Seth and I have learned over the years, and actually, so one of the things that the NFL does is, and one of the things that actually college football should do, is use the Big Data Bowl as a very easy sifting method for people that are qualified to potentially work with the data. Like that alongside of a resume or a good CV is a very useful way to get things rolling there for teams that generally do not have like a great deal of expertise in how to hire people in that space. But the other thing is your public profile is noted by everyone. Like literally everyone in the industry, if you're putting out anything that's interesting, like they will have seen you. And I found that amazing. Like James and I, back when we did the StatsBomb podcast on the soccer side, we would meet random coaches from places that have never interacted with us. And they're like, oh my God, I listened to your pod. I love it. I was like, oh, that's really weird. Oh yeah, I've been following your stuff since like 2014. Like, well, that's also kind of overwhelming and strange. But here's the key thing that I wanted to note on this. a lot of people say that, oh yeah, I could do that if I wanted to, or if someone gave me the job, I'd be really excited to do that as a job. It is the other way around. If you are not already doing it, you will not be hired to do that job most of the time, because the people that have desire, that give a shit, where it's an overwhelming, almost obsession to be able to work with that data, those are the people that, you know, are noted and most likely to get those jobs. And so if you're not already doing it, like, get off your ass and do it. Right? There's the only thing stopping you is you. And that is the crucial thing that you have to realize. Like, it might be you don't have that much time. That's great. You can learn Python in 30 minutes a day. And in fact, I think it's a great point to plug a friend of ours' book, who just went on to a job in the big time NFL. I'm going to kick it over to Seth to be able to do that, since he is the professional plugger of books.
Our friend of the program, Eric Eager, wrote alongside a colleague of his named Richard Erickson, wrote a book that is a good tutorial in learning football analytics in either Python or R. As a self-taught coder myself, when I was starting to do basketball analysis, I realized that I could do some stuff in Excel. It just took so long. Maybe not the first time I did something, but anytime I wanted to repeat or update something, it was such a laborious process that I had to, teach myself a scripting language. And I learned R, and there's good basic intro resources to learning these things. The problem is sort of the unless you're like really into like flowers or cars, the sort of basic sample data sets are, I don't want to say opaque, but they're not tactile in the same way that, for example, you use our data, or you use something from NFL FastStar, and you are a knowledgeable football person. You already have a understanding of sort of what you're working with is, what some interactions might be. So if you learn the syntax of how to do a thing, you kind of already know the thing you want to do. And so I think that is a great entry point for not just doing sports analysis, but sort of increasing your facility and literacy with using data in a programming language to begin with, is just to, take a data set something about, because it is the underlying stuff a lot about. I mean, I think we've all had the experience of kind of interviewing or talking to people who have great data skills, but not really whatever the sport is, soccer for Ted, basketball for me, football for Matt. Not really a great understanding of the sport as a sport, and they do stuff that is maybe good data, but bad football, bad basketball, bad soccer. And so if you start with something, okay, I know something about this, and you kind of teach yourself the tools, you both learn more about the thing you're studying, but also just intrinsically learn the tools better. And that's something that in our world is not going to become less important over time, I wouldn't think.
So 2 wrinkles on top of that. One is that you should also learn data visualization on alongside of this, because that's one of the most important ways you can communicate the information that you're finding things. And it will be like a constant request from any job that you would get in the space, almost regardless of sport. And in fact, it's also a super practical way to prove your skills for a job that you might want. And in many cases, interviewers will be more excited about looking at your sports-based analysis stuff, and it gives them a great talking point, versus like any sort of basic project that you would have worked on in the flowers or cars data set. So it's not just more exciting for you as a sports fan who's probably listening to this podcast, but it's more exciting for the people that are going to interview you. It gives them more touch points, and it proves that you can work with interesting data sets and be able to do conclusions, and maybe be able to show that you understand how to do this, as well as kind of the analysis parts of it are just working in the actual tabular data sets.
I recently told my wife that I know a lot about penguins from the initial data set in R. So that's the thing that I really, when I talk to students quite a bit, and I always tell them, if you can try and work a sport specific project into your classes, it'll make your life so much better, but it'll also make it more fun, and it'll give you good examples of things that you can then produce for, like we've talked about, portfolios, and it will give a chance to get you noticed by other people. we've talked a little bit about free resources that are out there. We've plugged a book that we all agree is really well done. There have been some really good tutorials put out by Michigan students who are now professionals in the workplace, and highlighting those, I think, can be really good examples. So two come to mind really at the top of mind. Tej Seth and Arjun Menon have both put together some really good free tutorials on how to access data, how to build a couple of things. I know Arjun just recently did a code along like YouTube video that he put together. A former intern of mine that now works in the NFL put together a really well done tutorial on like clustering and how he would use clustering to evaluate, I believe, those quarterbacks. And the nice thing is it's great for the community. Those are always good resources that I point people toward. But it also, like Ted was talking about, it got them noticed. They were names that NFL teams, college teams, everybody in the business knew because they were putting stuff out there. The sports analytics community is growing, but it's not that big at this point.
And the need for more people as college programs switch this on is going to be dramatic. This is actually true in basketball as well. I think it'll happen in basketball, and has happened a bit in basketball. Soccer has just been a thing that's taken off a ton. We had some amazing stats come out today. So 11 of the top 13 teams in League One, which is the third division down in England, use StatsBomb data. And all of the NWSL now uses StatsBomb data, which both of those we were told, like, there's no reason to collect those. No one will have money to pay for those back in 2018. And I was like, this is not true. I promise you it will go this way. And obviously I put a big bet on it. This was a significant amount of money and time and energy. And that turned out to be true. But the most incredible thing was that, like, people like women's football will never have the money to be able to pay for recruitment data. And I was like, first of all, we're going to support this no matter what. And we put 6 leagues worth of free data out to the teams every single year. If you just want your league of data, we give that to you along with StatsBomb IQ. But 10 of the 14 teams in NWSL pay for that now. And that tells you, like, the shift in women's football that has happened over the last sort of 6 years. And it also tells you the value of this basic process. If it's true in women's soccer that this is the case, I promise you it is true in men's football in college and the NFL. I keep looking for new people to follow, and I have been since 2020 in the American football analytics space. And I was always deeply frustrated by the lack of quality visualizations, which I think is something that has landed pretty well in the team space for us when we introduce it to customers. But I've been really frustrated by everybody that's good gets hired and disappears, and then 3 years later you're like, oh wow, you're the manager of that department and you're hiring people. You were hired under the big data pool like 3 years ago, but now you. And so, like, the rapid ascent and need for really smart, sharp people that understand both parts of the game has been astounding. But also, as someone who just wanted content, I've been really irritated by it.
So I think that there's a we're talking a lot about the technical aspects of that, and I think you hit on a little bit in terms of the communication area, because I think that there's again, I mentioned earlier, people doing things that are like good stats, good math, good technique, maybe bad sport. Part of it is emphasis is placed on the technique and not necessarily on the communication. And this is why not just doing the work, but communicating the work, getting the reps at doing, whether it's data viz, whether it's a deck, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a video or a podcast appearance. Communicating this stuff well to people who are subject matter experts but not technical experts is a defined skill set, and it's very hard, and you're going to be bad at it the first time you do it, and the second time you do it, and the third time. So you just need reps at, okay, that's interesting. Why does it matter?
Reps is the most underrated thing that people talk about, outside of the people that are like bullshit hustle culture people, where they're like, look, work 80 hours a week. And then that's all reps. And you're like, whoa, okay, I'm not sure that's true. But yeah, as Poker is the same way, right? Like you've got to learn how to play out of different positions. You've got to learn how to read the information. One of the biggest things that people, regardless if it's team or people like us or Sumo or whatever, like they want to see what your logic looks like, right? Like how do you break down your thought process to be able to do this? And the other thing that they care about is, are you someone that I cannot put in a room with coaches because you are going to ruin the credibility of my department? That is a thing that has happened multiple times from people that were in academia that then were transferred into the team space. Like basically you put them there and they flounder, and then you ruin what can be months or years worth of work by putting someone who allegedly has credibility and knowledge in the middle of a meat grinder and spits them right back out. Like, nope, you failed. Forget about it.
Sort of a friend of ours who runs Driveline Baseball, and I believe consults or has a role in the Red Sox organization now, Kyle Boddy. Something he's talked about a lot is explaining why so many athletes, so many coaches have sort of a negative connotation with analytics. And some of it is sort of old school stodginess, but some of it is also the way he put it, I believe, is their initial interaction with it came in the form of having information delivered by, I believe the term he used was low feel analysts, was someone who came in and just dropped a raft of numbers on them and said, it's obvious, and here's why you need to do this. And it's just like, I can't recommend the LeBron James, JJ Redick podcast enough for people who are basketball. And there was an episode a couple weeks ago where JJ asked LeBron, has any analytics person come to you and said, you should change your game this way, yada, yada, yada. And LeBron just laughed because of course he should, because this is one of the foremost basketball geniuses of all time. Who the hell are you to be? So that's obviously now you can, if you present things in the right way, you can influence and put things in their thought process that's interesting. Let me think about that. Let me test it out.
You might want to defend in this way, in this situation, against this set of players. Well, that's all a data nerd that's telling LeBron something that might be useful for him to incorporate in his game. That is the gentle feel way to do it. The other motherfuckers that like just throw turds in the punch bowl all the time, the mainstream media who do not actually know how to do the analysis here. And they take all of the stats that like we have disregarded 5 years ago as, oh, this is useless. And then they write about them. And the coach then gets the information from the mainstream media. And like, you're just like head desking the whole time. And you get a fucking email about it, or you get a text about it. And you're like, well, I saw this, and what does that mean? I'm like, oh my God, coach, this person isn't qualified to do anything other than be a sports writer. They got their education in this area 30 years ago, and they got their job as a fucking friend network job. But no, definitely let's talk about their analysis and why they think this particular thing is valid, even though it is an absolute steaming pile that you should not pay any attention to. And the funniest thing is, we know college coaches that do this on a regular basis.
Some of our friends clearly doesn't have strong feelings about this at all.
I mean, we know we know pro execs who do this on a regular basis. So it's not
all of our faces clearly had this thing. Like we were all having the same reaction. It was just that I was the one that was speaking at the time.
Yeah.
To finish on this, we've talked a lot about communicating, and I have two, I think, examples, stories, and things to share. One of which is I have a close friend who coaches in the NFL, and he shared a story. So his analytics professional came to him with a project that he'd done. He'd done a lot of work on it. And I have this great paper. It was a couple of pages long to share exactly the research that he did, how he went about it, different examples, and what should happen with it. And the head coach looked at it and handed it back, and he's like, "This is too long. Like, if it's more than one page, I don't have time." And so, for people that are in the statistics analytics space, the tendency is to share everything, right? Like, here's how I went about it. Here are all the factors. This is what I did to tune my model. This is the examples that I found. But you really need to be able to communicate it really quickly. So there's having good data viz, but then also being able to communicate it to a decision maker in their language in a way that they're actually going to have, time and want to look at it. So I think that's a big deal.
They do not care about your methodology unless they really get your point or they want to talk about the finer bits. So put your fucking methodology all the way at the bottom, get it out of the way, and like put all of your one-pager stuff up top so that we can at least have a thoughtful discussion around that. If I want to talk into it, or if somebody else wants to talk into it, great. But like, what's the question you're answering? What's the conclusion that you came to? Maybe a little bit about why that was, counterintuitive or fits exactly what we think. And then everything else is like below the line or in the appendix. Like, hey, this is the giant methodology. Like, It's the opposite of the way that they teach you to write elsewhere. But when you're dealing with people that don't have time, you need to get their attention quickly and they need to get to the point and then get out of there if you have to. Or if they really care, if you guys want to have an argue about it differently, then that's a section where you can get into the later bits. Go ahead. You had another point.
Yeah, to finish there, one book that I suggested to a few students that were kind of working with me in the off season, it's called Storytelling with Data, a data visualization guide for business professionals.
This sounds lovely. I want to know about this too.
It is not sports specific. And the tricky thing is that all of the analysis is done in Excel. But it's really amazing what this woman's able to do with these charts in Excel. But the idea is that you're not going to read this book and be creating these charts in Excel. But it talks, I think there are maybe 10 rules for data visualization that I think are really beneficial for people as they're trying to learn that skill. Because, again, a lot of the school academic training is on the model and getting the right tools and all of the back end, and very little is done on presenting your data or visualization or getting a point across well. And so I think that we have to look for other resources in those areas. And so it's a book that I really liked. It was something that it really affected the vizzes that I was creating and trying to do when I was working at UVA.
One of the things that I was surprised by when I went to learn data viz is how recent it is. Like, it's a relatively new field. People would then quote back the rules that they learned from somewhere else and tell me why I was wrong. And I was like, no, actually, you're wrong in about these 10 ways if you're thoughtful about it. But you can listen to the person that just recently wrote a book in 2013, or you can listen to the person that's done like practical work on this for the last 4 or 5 years. And these are all the additional lessons that we've learned. So learning the rules and the lessons is great, but like that just makes you an expert enough so that you can figure out when you can violate those things because they're unnecessary, because you've managed to update or use really useful scientific data science to then improve the viz projections. Matt, I'm going to switch tacks here. You've worked with a few different data sets, and we're going to talk a little bit about StatsBomb data and what we did and why. What has surprised you about the data sets that we've produced versus the things that you'd worked with previously?
I have a few thoughts, obviously, but I think my biggest thing that I like about the StatsBomb data and the thing that has been the most eye-opening is just the sheer amount of stuff that you can get from not just the tracking data itself is, one thing, but from the eventing data it's just so deep and so much information there that gets lost if you're trying to do things just from play-by-play data. Like, you can get a lot from just here's a play, this is what happened in that play. With the eventing data, you get so much more about how things happen. You get, exact tackle locations, how long it was before the runner went down, the location of all these different players at different times throughout the play. And
for those who are uninitiated in this, so play-by-play is more of like an aggregate of what happened in the play, and it can have attributes and things that happened, and they can be attached to a player, etc. Event data is much more granular, very specific timestamps and location information about what happened in the play. And you can aggregate that up into a play-by-play. And in fact, we did that. We produced the best play-by-play stuff that anybody had seen. But that's the separation between play-by-play is basic aggregate stuff at a play level. Event data is super detailed stuff inside of a play. And in fact, originally when we were talking to people about this product, they didn't get it. They didn't get how useful it would be. And then when they started to tuck into the data sets, they're like, holy shit, there's like way more information. And in soccer, we knew this because we had that data early on. The event data, we never had play-by-play because there's no place. But the event data was like 80% of the signal. And then tracking was 20% on top of that. And then the third tier of that is whatever frequency tracking data that you have. NGS data set is 10 frames per second or 10 hertz. And what we have is 30 hertz. We produce whatever the video is that we're getting from it. So those are the three different kind of data sets that we're talking about you can work with in both the public sets and some of the private ones.
Can I soapbox here for a second?
Please.
So this is something that understanding the value of tracking data has been a square that needs to be circled, and it's the same adoption curve in every sport. Is the initial thing is, oh, I know where all the players are running, and shake it up, throw it in underpants gnomes, tracking data, profit. Really, the as you're saying, the 80-20 of it, the initial use case is tracking data allows you to create a very robust event data set based on sort of algorithms and analysis and things that would take you 5 hours of play if you're going to chart every little bit of this. Or you can take the pattern of moving dots or what have you and generate these concepts. I've referred to it a billion times, but the former CEO of Second Spectrum used to describe this as pulling basketball words from the data from their basketball tracking set. And that's where the power is, because we've talked earlier about explainability and making a sport person understand. If you're talking in terms of vectors and like Bezier curves or whatever, eyes are gonna glaze over. If you're talking about like routes and formations and coverages and stuff like that have been distilled into categorical events, now you're talking the language they can understand. And that's where the power is, to be able to quickly sift, sort, combine, analyze results from all of those various interactions.
I think the line data that we've talked about in past episodes remains kind of the most interesting thing that we could put together that sort of solved the problem of how do we better evaluate what's happening in the trenches, offensive, defensive line. But I think the thing that surprised me about having designed the data set, the thing that surprised me going forward was what we could do with it to save people time. And there were two big surprises that I kind of wasn't expecting. One was technological, our tech people and video people did. And the other one is something that kind of the AI curves really kicked in as we were releasing the data set. So the AI curve one is effectively, we already automatically classify routes, and we're about 10% more accurate on a per route basis in classifying those than humans at the competitor. And part of that is because classifying routes are hard, they're muddy. We have some interesting white papers that we built to be able to tell you like what happened and why. And so that's like still pretty early in our data curve. So like the more we get aggregate information on that, the better that classification will get, the further it'll separate from humans doing it on a regular basis. Now, that doesn't mean that the receiver didn't run the route wrong. We're just telling you what they did. So that was like the first layer of that, the automatic classification that starts to save people time. Into the boundary, all the formations being automatically classified for you immediately, like that's all there so that you don't have to go through and tag it yourselves unless you've got special information you're trying to do. And add to that to be able to do video cutouts, etc. But the bigger one that I'm most excited about is like the automatic classification of plays and coverages and schemes, right? Like that's something that saves teams 60 to 100 hours a week and being able to produce their analysis. And it also moves that to the start of the week. So if you have a Saturday game, the full data set's turned around basically in 24 hours, like some of that's turned around in 12 hours. Like now, on Sunday, you can actually do your analysis so that your Monday installs have that information ready to go, especially if you've done, like a lot of teams will do Thursday, Friday work for the next opponent, depending on what's going on in that area. So that was one area that I was surprised that I'm really excited by. And the other one is much simpler, but a bigger tech thing the wizards behind StatsBomb IQ figured out, which is effectively, because we have all the tracking data, we can highlight the players on the video to be able to then see them. And I think Seth had a call that he was in that distilled it the best. They looked at it and they're like, wow, that might not seem like a big deal, but it saves our scouts 1 second 10,000 times in trying to find those players immediately and knowing where they're at. But say you've got a high school kid that you're looking at and you're trying to figure that out. We collect high school data. We also collect, Division II data, FCS data, whatever we get from our customers, we can collect that. So say you're trying to see these guys. Sometimes they're on the defensive line. They move around. They're hard to distinguish. The dot is there, the highlight is there, and you can pick that up immediately. That type of stuff was stuff that it makes me really excited as a product person to be able to say, yeah, so coach, we're just going to make your life a lot better. That's as simple as it gets.
The limiting factor in any sort of competitive sporting context is time. You only have so much practice time. You only have so much game planning time. You only have so much analysis time. So that 1 second might not sound like a lot, but if you're saving, as you say, saving that 1 second 10,000 times, how much more work are you getting through in a given time period? How much sharper are you mentally to actually collate this information? To go Kahneman using, instead of using type 1 thinking to try to figure out, wait, who am I looking at here? It's just there. And then you can kind of, your analysis can just immediately kick in on, that's the guy I'm looking at. What is my evaluation rubric, I guess, because I'm staring right at the guy, because I didn't have to spend any time figuring out who I'm looking at.
People were worried about their jobs, but all we're trying to do is let them think smarter. That's true. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that the thing that when data saves time is when you are able to help a coach solve a problem or with an issue that they have. And so it kind of comes back to what we were talking about with being able to speak the language, whatever that is, whatever sport that is, whatever business that is. If you're able to show a coach, hey, I know as the offensive line coach, you look at blitzes on film every Tuesday, and you spend 2 hours watching blitzes, who's blitzing, where they're blitzing from. With the data that StatsBomb or whatever has, we can show you who blitzes, their depth, their actual track that they take when they blitz, who is creating havoc, what gaps they shoot through. You can get all of this information on our IQ platform in 5 minutes. And if you can save a coach those 2 hours, then they can spend those 2 hours either creating a better game plan for, hey, we know this is what we're going to do with our protection or what have you. And so I think if you work for a team and you're looking for, hey, how can I be more helpful? Talk to the coaches, try and find out ways that you can help them. If you don't work for a team, find something that you are passionate about with that sport. If you are somebody who is really into defensive back play, then say, all right, well, what is it about a defensive back that I want to analyze? Find the data, do some analysis, and then that could be a good process for doing analytics if you work for a team. Is if you can help them solve problems, then it's like, oh, well, that's awesome. What about all these other problems? Can you help me here, and here?
Coach, what was the next question that you would have asked this week if we had a little more time to be able to do our analysis? Or what was the thing that you really would have liked to have known last week that we did not give you in terms of information? And now you're starting to create a list of questions that turn into projects to be able to do that. Here's another one you were talking about that I think is really interesting that you could do in the TB12 data set. You can sort of look at things from a coordinator basis or a team by team basis, and you can look at different coordinators that help shut down or had no success against Brady over the years, right? Teams, especially in the AFC East, that faced it multiple times. Like, what did they do against him? When he had bad games, do they have patterns that work there? All of that work translates into professional work that you would do in exactly the same way. How did Brady look when he was being blitzed? From the left side, from the right side, by different, how many different rushers were there? All of that's really useful, interesting information that you can ask on the data set that then turns into your portfolio to be able to look at these team jobs or, real world jobs as well.
A question I would ask our coaches regularly, and they probably got sick of it, was if you could have access to any information about an opponent or about ourselves, like what would it be? Something that you think is impossible to find out. And then often the first couple of times I asked it, they're like, I don't know, like come back to me in a little bit. But then as you got them thinking about like the possibilities of data, almost anything you can find in data somewhere. It may take a little bit of work on your end, or finding some analysis or tagging it yourself, but you can always find something that a coach would be really interested in. And I think that the things that I always tell people is to, one, work on your communication and how you explain things. But the other thing is learn to be creative with data. And it can be tricky at times to think like, what is something either new or something that I want to start researching? And I think that is the ability to always be creative and looking for new ways to analyze or new things that you can find. It's a skill, and it can be tricky if you're, bogged down by other things. But I think learning to be creative is another thing that I share with people, and I think is a beneficial thing to work on.
Walking through the door with a self-scout of a team and then flagging the things that are pretty obvious that they have tells on, that is super valuable information. And not enough of those teams do that because they get busy during the season. Seth's got a point on this one.
No, and I think part of the reason that people don't want to do that is that they're worried they might say something negative or oh, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. If that's the reaction, instead of, that's interesting, let me think about it. That's not a place that's not a place that you want to work. B, that's not a place that would get use out of that kind of, because the curiosity has to be both ways. The open-mindedness of looking at things a new way. Okay, well, yeah, that is a problem, but we looked at it, and on sort of across the universe of how we're addressing things, that's a problem we're going to have to live with. Or no, that is a problem. Let's see if we can shore that up away.
We didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling us. Like, that's the response that smart people in the analytics space will have, especially if you're not an asshole about providing the information, which some of you have tone problems on the internet. Not, this is very much pot, kettle, black type stuff. But the last thing that I would say about learning to work with data and doing stuff is, do not be afraid of copying something you found inspiring on the internet and just doing it again as a learning project, right? Like, don't steal it forever. Don't take somebody's Viz profile and then do all of it and then produce like your own company or your own subscription-based model on the internet. That's really irritating. But what you can do is, as a learning process, anything you find inspiring, like recreate that, because it's a good tool building process that you should absolutely do. Definitely don't publish a book based off of other people's research and then, in certain sports or anything like that. That's a bad thing that I can see somebody's face melting over here. I love to needle him. Let's talk about Manchester United again, shall we? He's on mute. Yes.
On that note, I think that's a good spot to wrap for this week, and I guess this season of the StatsBomb Football Podcast. I want to thank both, obviously, Matt, Ted, Cade Massey, Bill Conley, the people who've joined us as guests, Shane Regal, who broke his podcast duck with us a few weeks back, but also just thank the people who have, I know, Matt, this has happened to you a bunch, that people who have surprised you saying, oh, I listened to your podcast. That was cool. And I want to thank the people for listening and commenting and things like that. And, thank the two of you for taking this time every week to chat with me.
Matt's just smiling. He's most excited to talk about food. He wanted an excuse to get out there, have an audio conversation about food all the time. I feel the same. We love to go out and eat food. It's the best part about offsites, right?
Oh yeah.
If you're in London, go to the Barbary. That's my offsite. I've known you for a decade. That's the best gift you've ever given me, is that restaurant.
Well, I'm in New York next week, and I'm going to go on a pizza odyssey. So expect to see some photos of slices. All right, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. We're going to take a break here, but hopefully we've given you resources and things to think about in the nerd space. And Matt, generally, thank you to you for this season being the football side of this silly podcast, because Seth and I have not been the most awesome at holding up that particular expertise.
No, it's been a joy. I always love talking football analytics. Love talking with you two as well. And yeah, just appreciate everyone for listening.
You and Cade should have a podcast together. Like, that episode was awesome.
It was a lot of fun.
All right. Cheers,
Hit
everybody.
me up,
Thank
Cade.
you. Bye.